So we are now 1 day away from the Las Vegas Raiders' very first preseason game. They play the Seattle Seahawks tomorrow, Thursday Night Football. And I'm excited as hell for this game, man. We've waited so long up to this point. We've had so many different reports and rumors and just so many random things that have happened, right? Christian Wilkins, one of them. But we have real football tomorrow, man, and I'm really, really excited for this. And I know it's just preseason, but it is the very first preseason game, and we get to watch a lot of the younger players for the Raiders as well. The biggest thing I'm excited about is that the Raiders starters will actually play tomorrow. Pete Carroll confirmed this yesterday in a presser. Sean Reed puts it out there, essentially telling us that Raiders head coach Pete Carroll said he plans to play the starters against the Seahawks on Thursday. So the Raiders will put their starters out there. Now, it is important to note that the Seahawks head coach has actually already told us that the Seahawks will not put their starters out. So the Raiders starters will be going up against backup players. And, I'm sure the Seahawks will have some starting players, right? If they have like rookies or young players that need to kind of develop a little bit, like a Tyree Wilson type of player. I'm sure those guys will play for the Seahawks. But generally speaking, the Seahawks will not put their official starters out there. So the Raiders starters will be playing some backups. But I'm excited to see what these guys can still do even against some of the backups. I want to see what the Raiders running back looks like, Ashton Jeanty specifically. Is he as, how he's kind of being advertised? Because there was a really interesting report by Jordan Schultz. He said this shouldn't come as a surprise, but I've constantly heard Ashton Jeanty has been turning heads in a major way since the moment he stepped onto the field in Vegas. The pre-draft buzz around his elite contact balance, explosiveness, and natural feel as a runner wasn't just hype. The Raiders are already seeing it all come to life. Truly a special player. To me, this is a phenomenal report coming out from Schultz. In practice, one of the things that's kind of hard to really see is even in training camp is the run game. Is your run game going to be good? Is it not going to be good? And a part of that comes down to the fact that you're not bringing your own players down. So Ashton Jeanty, he might pick up 1 yard, and there might be a guy that can make the tackle, and he might, put his arm on Ashton Jeanty, but he's not bringing him actually down onto the ground. So the play might be a 30-yard run, but is it really 30 yards, or was he tackled because Jordan Meredith couldn't make a block, right? Or whatever happens, right? And, the fact that we're hearing Jordan Schultz say that, hey, when there is live things kind of going on, and we are seeing Ashton Jeanty maybe in open space, we're seeing this guy kind of flash some of the potential he had shown us in the past. And I'm not surprised, right? Like, we hear some of the noise kind of coming from some of the, reporters, some fans that have been able to go to some of the open practices have talked about Ashton Jeanty. And of course, we knew what this guy was in college, but college is different than the NFL, right? When you get to the NFL, you have to kind of get used to the game speed. You have to kind of develop and really be able to put it together. Running backs, kind of don't always fall in that same category. Usually, if you're a great running back, you're great on day one. And that's what they're saying about Ashton Jeanty right now. So I'm really excited to watch Ashton Jeanty in this preseason game. He might have 3 touches, but we'll see what he does on those 3 touches. Imagine if he takes his first touch the distance, right? Like, he did that a lot at Boise State. So we will see him do that for the Raiders. We'll see how he kind of does it when that time comes. But I am excited that the Raiders are going to let the starters play. I think it's very important that if you want to have success come week 1, you got to put your players out there against live competition. One series is one series, but it's one series more than some teams who don't play their starters. It allows you to kind of get better as a football team. If you don't have a good, let's say your right guard's not a good right guard, if he's losing in preseason, that's something hey, maybe we should go out there and potentially get another right guard. If your wide receiver, your ex-wide receiver, right, if he's a rookie and he's not having success, maybe you go out there and say, let's bring in a veteran, right? There's some guys that might be available. But you find that stuff out by live competition, especially comparing it to practice. Practice, a lot of it is you're going up against the same guys for 3-4 weeks. You get used to those guys, right? So, again, it's just something to kind of keep in mind. Also, the Raiders did drop the official depth chart for this preseason game. This actually came out, I believe, 2 days ago. So this has kind of been out there, but I want to talk about it regardless because of the fact that for the Raiders, this is gonna mean something, right? Especially given that we're gonna have starters kind of go out there. So we'll just go through this kind of quickly. We'll start right here with the offensive linemen. To me, nothing really is surprising. At this point, I think we can all pretty much say Jordan Meredith will likely be the starting center for the Raiders. We don't have to agree with it, right? And I know a lot of you guys don't agree with it, and I definitely don't either. But it is what it is, right? If Jordan Meredith is better than Alex Kappa, which does seem like that's what it probably is at this point, it makes sense to allow Jordan Meredith to start at center and then move Paris Johnson over to right guard. At the end of the day, Jackson Paris Johnson is, the drop off between center and right guard. I think there's going to be a small drop off, but it's not the type of drop off you might have between Jordan Meredith and Alex Kappa. But I think Alex Kappa is a terrible player. That's my personal opinion. At least he was on tape the last 2 years. So, with that, we'll see what actually kind of happens. But I think we can say at this point, Jordan Meredith is going to be a starting center for the Raiders. Jackson Paris Johnson or Alex Kappa are it's kind of tagged at right guard. Is there really a battle between Kappa and Paris Johnson? Like, could Paris Johnson be a backup this season? I find that hard to believe, truth be told. And none of it really is surprising at all. Now, the one thing I will say, it's not a surprise because I had already heard this from the guy that I know at the Raiders camp. He had already filled me in. This is how the rotations are kind of working, so it's not a surprise, but we should talk about it, right? So, if you guys look at the wide receivers, Dante Thornton is listed as the first team wide receiver. Jacoby Myers listed as a first team, and Trey Tucker is listed as a first team as well. But notice that Jack Bech is behind Trey Tucker, and not necessarily behind Jacoby Myers or necessarily behind Dante Thornton. That matters, believe it or not. And I know some people will say it might not matter. It definitely matters. Trust me on this. The Raiders are going to rotate in Jack Bech and Trey Tucker. Those two guys are going to run the same type of route concepts. They're going to be running the same type of influence routes. And really, Jacoby Myers and Dante Thornton are going to be the two primary receivers for the Raiders. They're going to be the guys that run the actual routes that we're going to be targeting within Chip Kelly's offense. Trey Tucker's going to run deep to bring in two guys, right? To essentially take the corner and safety and kind of force these guys to double team him. All while Dante Thornton runs underneath it. And, again, it's important to recognize, Colin Johnson, another, 6'5" wide receiver, is the backup to Dante Thornton. So this kind of tells us what the Raiders actually think about that, right? About the unit, the wide receiver unit. And some people are even going to, push back and say, hey, this stuff's put out by, like, the people within the Raiders building. It's not even probably the coach. Like, they probably could care less about this stuff. But trust me, the coaches are going to look at this before they allow this stuff to get out. Because, people like me are going to overanalyze the crap out of this. Of course, there's hundreds of people that do the same exact thing, right? But this stuff matters, right, in my opinion. This tells me Thornton, Myers, and Trey Tucker are your starting three wide receivers, which isn't a surprise, right? Again, we've talked about this already. But it's also surprising. It is also interesting that Jack Bech is behind Trey Tucker and not Dante Thornton or Jacoby Myers. Obviously, I would have thought that Jack Bech is more so Jacoby Myers, right? Like, they're similar comped players, right, in my personal opinion. But I think for the first year that Jack Bech is in the NFL, or at least right now, him running that Trey Tucker influence role makes the most sense, in my opinion, right? And again, it is early on in the process, so we'll see what, kind of happens. Another thing that I kind of found interesting was Zamir White being listed as high as he kind of is. And I see the or here between Zamir White and Raheem Mostert. I find it interesting that Zamir White is as high as he is. Truth be told, I thought Sincere McCormick would be the or, right? I thought he would be the guy that kind of gets that opportunity. But it looks like it's going to be Zamir White possibly, right? Which could also mean if the Raiders, if they plan to keep 4 running backs, given Dylan Labe is under contract, Labe may actually make the roster over Sincere McCormick. So that's something to kind of keep an eye on. Don't really know if it means a whole lot. But again, it's just something to kind of keep an eye on. The defense is another, it's another interesting unit, right? Because on one end, your defensive tackles are kind of all over the place at this point, right? You don't know which one of these guys is going to really step up for the Raiders. But Jonah Laulu and Adam Butler get listed as the 2 starting defensive tackles, with the 2 backups to them being Zach Carter and Lee Kai Fotu. These are the 4 guys that we've heard have been taking first-team reps. So I'm not surprised with this. But it is interesting that Laulu is listed as the first team with Carter and Fotu as the backups. Also, do note, Fotu was actually seen in a walking boot, I believe, yesterday. So he might not actually play for the Raiders in this first preseason game, which I think could hinder, if he makes the roster. I think he would. But, what if, you have 2 rookies that you already drafted. you have Adam Butler, you have Zach Carter, you have Jonah Lalu. That's already 5 defensive tackles right there. You brought in Tank Booker via trade. That puts you at 6 defensive tackles, right? So, you know, is Fodu 100% guaranteed a roster spot? I don't know. I don't think he is, right? Defensive end, not really surprised. You got Maxx Crosby, Malcolm Koonce, Charles Snowden, and Tyree Wilson as the 2 backups. And then you got Ja Joyner, Jafari Harvey. Harvey's a guy to keep an eye on, man. We saw the open practice, and he looked good. He had 2 winning reps. One was against DJ Glaze. And keep in mind, there was only like 9 plays that we actually got to watch. But Harvey made 2 plays in those 9 plays, right, where he actually flashed a little bit. Most of the time, most guys don't flash, right? So if you flash 2 out of 9 times, to me, that's interesting, right? He's a guy I'm going to definitely be watching in this preseason game. And, you know, one of the interesting things with this game will be that pretty much within the first game, right, this very first game, we're going to be able to see flashes, and we're going to be able to see guys that will have a real opportunity to make the roster. If there's guys, you know, UDFAs, those type of things, could make the roster. Amari Gainer flashed right away, right? We knew right away this guy's going to most likely make the roster. So if there's a guy that's going to make the roster, we'll see it right away. I didn't mention this with the quarterbacks, but I am excited to watch Cam Miller. I'll probably do a video tomorrow talking about some of the matchups and things that I'm excited to watch. But yeah, just getting back to the linebackers, you have Landon Roberts listed as the middle linebacker. You have Jermaine Pratt, Devin White listed as the outside linebackers. Now, obviously, they list 3 linebackers. They also do list 3 corners, which is kind of interesting. But, you know, you got those 3 guys first, and then behind them, you have Jamal Adams, Tommy Ackenberg, and Jalen Smith, Amari Gainer, Cody Lindenberg, Matt Jones behind those guys, and Michael Baird all the way at the end. You know, it's going to be interesting to see the linebacker unit kind of come together. If we come out in base defense in the very first drive, which we might, right? The Raiders might run base just to kind of start it off. I could definitely see these 3 guys being the guys, but we also heard that Jamal Adams has been taking some first-team snaps. But if we go into nickel, I could also see Jamal Adams kind of coming onto the field, especially if it's like a 3rd down situation. Cornerbacks, Darnay Holmes, Darian Porter, Eric Stokes. The interesting thing with this is behind Darian Porter is actually Cameron Richardson. And we've heard those are the 2 guys that have been kind of competing with one another right now. Ja'Cory Bennett is obviously listed here, but he's been traded at this point. JT Woods moves up, so he's now behind Eric Stokes, which makes sense, right? If I'm being honest, the boundary cornerbacks for the Raiders, there's 4 guys that are going to play this season. We already know which 4 it is. At this point, we're going to find out which 2 will get the first opportunities, but we know 4 guys will will play for the Raiders this year. That's going to be obviously Darian Porter, Eric Stokes, Cameron Richardson, and JT Woods. Those 4 guys will 100% play for the Raiders this season. I think all 4 are already locked into making the roster. It's interesting that Greedy Vance is listed in the slot, right behind Darnay Holmes. Now, I know Darnay Holmes is taking slot snaps for the Raiders. I haven't heard the same thing with Greedy Vance. I was under the assumption he was taking boundary snaps. So that is something I will have to confirm. But given he's listed behind Darnay Holmes, that tells me that those are the snaps he is taking. Right, but I'm not 100% sure if that's true or not. You got Isaiah Pola-Mao, Jeremy Chin listed as your 2 starting safeties. Thomas Harper, Chris Smith right behind them. And I'm not surprised to see Thomas Harper and even Chris Smith now, given that he was the guy that took those snaps when Lonnie Johnson kind of went down. I'm not surprised. Thomas Harper is going to play a lot for the Raiders this season. You know, again, I think it's one of those things that, you know, it'll probably be fluid, right? Maybe Chris Smith plays a little bit more, but Thomas Harper took snaps with the first-team unit even in the past before Lonnie Johnson went down, as opposed to Chris Smith never had. He only got those snaps. He only got those snaps once Lonnie Johnson went down. In fact, yesterday the Raiders actually brought in a couple of different defensive backs, right? The Raiders worked out safety Terrell Edmonds. They worked out cornerback Mekhi Garner and cornerback BJ Mays. This was according to the league's transaction wire. If you guys don't know, Terrell Edmonds, former first-round pick. He was picked at the end of the first round by the Pittsburgh Steelers. Twin brother of Tremaine Edmonds, who I think is currently with the Bears. Don't quote me on that. Both guys were first-round picks. But Terrell Edmonds, kind of an interesting player to bring in, right? Because Lonnie Johnson obviously went down. So the Raiders need some help at the safety position, and they've had 2 or 3 days now without Lonnie Johnson, and they obviously feel a certain type of way about that room. Right? They obviously feel, hey, it's probably not good enough with where we're kind of at. Specifically, the Raiders need a guy that's like a post safety, right? And I'm not saying Terrell Edmunds is a post safety, but he has starter experience. And if you're going to ask me, do I trust Chris Smith more than Terrell Edmunds? I do not. I'd rather trust a guy who has played 2,000-3,000 snaps in the NFL. And again, I think Terrell Edmunds, he has played a lot more in the box, but I do think he plays as a post safety. He's, I think 6'1", so he fits that profile, the size profile that Pete Carroll kind of wants. And again, Darnay Holmes, Chris Smith are the two post safeties, and when the Raiders get into that big nickel package, Isaiah Pola-Mao comes down in the box, as is Jeremy Chinn. So we need a Darnell or a Thomas Harper to step up. We need to know if Thomas Harper gets hurt, who's that next man up at that post safety spot in the big nickel package, and Terrell Edmunds may be the guy. So that's something that's kind of interesting to keep an eye on. Mekhi Garner as well as BJ Mays are interesting players as well. I looked into their background a little bit. Nothing too exciting with those two guys, but we'll see what these guys have developed into and what they kind of look like this season if the Raiders decide to sign any of these guys. But it is interesting that they're bringing in a cornerback as well, right? Something that's kind of keep an eye on. Let's wrap this video up, man. Let's go ahead and just wrap it up. There's a viral video trending right now with the Raiders' former head coach, Antonio Pierce. If you guys have not seen it, here he is. He's basically walking with the Kansas City Chiefs defensive coordinator here. This is Steve Spagnuolo. And, they're basically talking, and you can also see Antonio Pierce is in Chiefs uniform. And a lot of Raider fans are super, super upset about this. I'm going to take the opposite approach. This does not bother me at all, and I want to explain why it does not bother me. First and foremost, I am not the type of fan that holds things against people, right? That's just not me. But more than that, I think for Antonio Pierce, yes, he was the Raiders head coach, and he has said in the past that he's a huge Raider fan. He absolutely grew up cheering for the Las Vegas Raiders. I guess Oakland Raiders at that time. But he grew up cheering for the Raiders, and the thing is that's not going to change. He's always going to be a Raider fan first and foremost. So even in, 12 months from now or 4 years from now or 15 years from now, if he decides I'm going to be a car salesman in 15 years from now, never get into coaching again, in 15 years from now, he will be a Raiders fan first and foremost because he grew up doing that. But as a coach, that's completely different, right? If he's getting an opportunity with the Kansas City Chiefs, Steve Spagnuolo, a former coach that Antonio Pierce as a player was underneath, he's going to take his opportunity and potentially take a job, right? And if that means it's with the Kansas City Chiefs, that's just what it is. If it's with the Chargers, with the Broncos, that's just what it is at the end of the day, right? For Antonio Pierce to try to get back into coaching, maybe it's with the Chiefs, maybe it's not. It really does not bother me at all. I understand he was a Raiders head coach. I also understand he's a Raiders fan. Some people are upset that he's in Chiefs gear. Now, even if he's not a coach for the Chiefs, even if Steve Spagnuolo just invited him in, maybe he's going to do some sort of special projects for Steve Spagnuolo. Maybe he is an official coach or maybe he's not. It still does not bother me that a former Raider coach, diehard Raider fan as he's claimed, is in the Chiefs building wearing Chiefs uniform. Does not bother me. When I was at the Hula Bowl as an example, they told us you got to wear Hula Bowl gear, right? We can't have our scouts, we can't have our coaches not having their Hula Bowl gear on. We need you guys to have that stuff on. And I'm not saying that's happening here, but we don't know, right? Like Steve Spagnuolo could tell Antonio Pierce that, hey, coaches have to wear Chiefs gear, right? It is mandatory for you to be out there. You got to put Chiefs gear on. We know that John Gruden also was at Chiefs practice a couple weeks back. He also has Chiefs gear on, right? So again, at the end of the day, it does not matter to me. It does not bother me. It is what it is. Personal beliefs, professional, it's two different things in my personal opinion. So it is what it is. That's my thought process. I want to know what you guys think. Does it bother you? Does it not bother you? Let me know in the comments below. Obviously, there's a lot of Raider fans upset about this. I understand it. Not a big deal to me, though. Let me know what you guys think. Thumbs up, subscribe. Real football tomorrow. I'm excited about that.